If you suspect that you have ADD, have you always kind of known that you thought differently than everyone else? Well, stay tuned and find out what differences are there for people with ADD from people who are not. Hi, this is G.H. Glade for Coaching ADD. People with ADD often recall that they think very differently than other people. And it comes out in a whole variety of ways. It may have been the kid who comes up with the right answer in math, but when it comes to the part of showing their work, they had no idea, but they got to the right point. People with ADD oftentimes are in what is best described as a permanent present. The world is kind of curvilinear. There isn't a good separation between past and future when you always rest in the present. And as a result, things like planning suffer. Oftentimes, people with ADD have difficulty really kind of putting together the consequences of past behavior. And sometimes they're inclined to repeat things, with parents often saying that, why won't my child learn from their mistake? And that's been the frustration for many parents. But if you think of the child or the adult as being just in the moment, the difficulty is that that plays out with out of sight, out of mind. And that's why from a coaching perspective, it is good to have good reminders right in front of the person. I recently talked with one of my clients about the need to have a task calendar because, if he doesn't see those tasks, it's like they don't exist. And we want to keep reminders within that permanent present. The ADD nervous system is always on. And the reality is, it is not a deficit in attention so much as it is excessive attention. People dive deep into a subject and they really will tend to hyper-focus, which is the other side of the coin from ADD. Everyone who has ADD knows about hyper-focus. These are the moments when the paper is due tomorrow and you get this sudden surge of adrenaline and you think, oh my gosh, what's going to happen if I don't get this done? And you buckle down and you crank it out, and it turns out pretty well because, the other thing about ADD people is they tend to be pretty bright, and when you have those horses to run with, boy, you can pull it off. But it is an excess of attention at times. The other thing is the ADD nervous system. People with ADD often have trouble filtering out sensory input, and that leads to a higher level of that distractibility. They are paying attention to way too much and have a difficulty in fundamentally filtering out this excess of attention. And as a result, attention gets diffused and people look very, very distractible. The ADD motor, particularly for people with hyperactivity, is always on. It's funny, a lot of parents of kids with a high ADD component, they reflect that my child has two speeds, off and high. And boy, I know that as a parent myself. My own child was very much that way. I remember an exasperated preschool teacher saying, well, he's very motoric, which was a nice, kind way of saying, God, this kid always keeps moving. Will he never slow down? Yeah, he does slow down. It's called sleeping. For the adult, oftentimes that hyperactivity gets pushed inward, and it tends to manifest as an inner sense of restlessness. And oftentimes that interchange between thoughts and that restlessness, that motor-driven, turned inward thing, gets played out as boredom, as oftentimes people being abrupt and wanting to move on quickly from things. I think of ADD as a very stimulus-driven brain. It thrives on stimuli. It thrives on challenge because challenge is stimulating. And boredom is the great evil for people with ADD because When things get repetitive, they get boring. And it's a mind that craves that new stimuli. And oftentimes this plays out in risk-taking behavior. I'm going to link my previous video because it talks about that relationship between risk. So let's take a moment. If you're enjoying this presentation, first of all, share it with others. The other thing is thump that like button. That pushes this program out into the algorithm for YouTube, which is one of the great mysteries of life. So let's return to that stimulus-driven brain. When a person is engaged with a stimulus that really kind of gets their juices flowing or floats their boat, several things happen. They are inclined first to hyperfocus. That's that focus that is so dialed in that oftentimes things on the outside of that focus kind of disappear. It's an interesting phenomena and is very much related to that whole concept of flow. The other way that that stimulus-driven brain plays out is in performance. Oftentimes you'll see kids with ADD, they are crushing it in some subjects and not doing so well in others. And unfortunately what happens is teachers come up with the conclusion of lazy kid. And that's the wrong conclusion. That should be flagging something entirely different. The other aspect about ADD, and this is part of the strongest suit in that thinking differently, is that ADD people tend to not think in a very linear way. By linear, imagine that line of dominoes. They don't have trouble pushing that first one over, and they're always going to get to the end. But they rarely divert off the main path. Now, what is creativity? Creativity is taking multiple ideas and putting them together in different ways. It can be played out in terms of artistic sorts of endeavors. Inventors really skew to people with ADD. Thomas Edison said that whole notion of creativity in what an ADD brain does naturally comes from that synthesis thinking, where you can put ideas together in very unique ways. That is really something that is useful in a number of occupations. In my former life as an emergency room nurse practitioner in psychiatry, we were faced with dilemmas of having people roll in, something is going wrong with them. They may tell you that, they may not. You observe all the various nuances of behavior that may give you an indication of what's going on. And you backdrop it against what you've been taught. And further, you backdrop it against what you know and what you've experienced. And you synthesize a hypothesis. And you don't get many points for being wrong in that environment. And the same thing happens in the medical side of the emergency room. You have someone roll in on a gurney, something's wrong, you need to figure it out, you need to be right, and then you need to wash, rinse, repeat, because it's going to happen all over again, generally in a few minutes. And that's where a synthesis-driven brain is really an asset. And the interesting part is when you are in that zone where your brain is really engaged and it's doing what it's designed to do, many of those executive functioning difficulties, they just flat out disappear. So again, if this has been useful for you, I want you to share it. There are other people out there who just wonder, do I have ADD? They know something's different. And this might be a helpful video for those people to see that may start connecting some dots for them. And that may eventually lead to them getting treatment and getting better management of those downsides of having an ADD brain. So this is G.H. Clay for Coaching ADD. I will see you next week when I put out another video. Take care.